This is AI Governance with Dr. Freddie Seba, a podcast and practical guide to AI oversight for boards and executive leadership.
Welcome to another episode of AI Governance with Dr. Freddie Seba, where we have the pleasure of inviting AI practitioners, those who are in the front lines, innovating, experimenting, and who can help us understand the challenges and the benefits of it. And all is centered on AI governance and ethics. So we want to make sure this is a tool that we could use to help humans help humanity. So we're very pleased to have a good friend of ours, uh, Dr. Chris Brooks, who is a professor at USF in computer science, and he has extensive amount of technology expertise, and not only technology for the sake of technology, but he looks at also the intersection between technology and social justice. So again, Chris, thank you so much for making the time. I know you are a busy man, so we do appreciate you joining us. So welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. So two questions to kick us off. So one, why should people listen to this episode? So everybody's busy, they're figuring out the commute, they're figuring out what to spend the next hour. So why listen to this conversation? And can you also introduce yourself? Didn't do a fair job
Yeah,
doing
for
that.
sure. Yeah, so thank you. So my name's Chris Brooks. As you said, I'm a professor of computer science at the University of San Francisco. I've been doing research around AI and machine learning for about 30 years now, since 1993, I guess. And I've always, as you mentioned, been really interested in the idea that technology for its own sake is not enough, that we need to have some sort of human need or human problem that we're trying to address, which is a very USF-y way of approaching education. That, education for its own benefit is great, but we really want to educate people to be human beings for others. And so in the AI space, it's that same question. Like, technological progress is interesting, but at what purpose? Like, why are we trying to do it? So I think if your users are interested, or your listeners, I'm sorry, I should say, are interested in thinking about not just what the cool new thing is, but why we might pick one thing over another, or why we might choose to support certain kinds of innovation or certain kinds of education, stick around and hopefully it'll be a fun conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for the intro, and thanks so much for telling our listeners and the why. So, can you tell us your role more specifically and what keeps you focused these days within academia and outside academia? Because you're very involved with the um, ecosystem here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. So as I said, I've been a professor at USF for 23 years now. Along the way, I've had a number of different roles there. I was a department chair for a while. I was an associate dean for about 9 years. And so in those positions, I've been more involved with program creation, strategic direction for the university, more like large scale efforts to steer the ship one way or another. I also teach our AI class, and I'm part of the team we're developing a new AI major, which is kind of a big deal.
Mm.
Uh, there's a lot of schools that are starting to figure out what this might look like. And so I've been a part of that conversation. And so as part of that, I go to a lot of workshops, and I'm part of a lot of efforts sponsored by the NSF around AI pedagogy, because AI is really changing, not just as a subject matter, but as a teaching instrument, how it is that we can better teach students and how students can learn. So I feel like I've kind of seen it from both the ground level of what I do personally, and then at this higher institutional or organizational level in terms of policy and strategic direction.
Great. So thank you. So for those of the audience who are not familiar with some of the discussions in higher ed, so you are a proponent of critical engagement with the technology. not only for the technology sake of it, but as a tool to use it to grow the individuals as a whole. And of course, this is in the context of most faculty rejecting the technology, being afraid of the technology, using AI detection, and what have you. So, can you kind of, for those of us who are not that familiar with this, can you walk us through how you engage with it? What's the
Yeah,
context, and what's your stand on all of this?
for sure, for sure. Yeah. So let me maybe start by saying that AI, what sometimes makes it hard to talk about is that it's not one thing, right? It's a lot of different things. Often, and that makes it slippery, right? Often we start, and what we really mean is tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, which sit on top of a technology called a large language model. And most of your listeners have probably interacted with this one way or another. Um, but AI can also mean data mining. It can mean autonomous vehicles. It can mean spacecraft. It can mean face recognition. It can mean a lot of other things. And so, what's challenging there is that those all have different strengths and weaknesses and different flaws. And so sometimes things kind of elide and drift, and in the media, that nuance doesn't always get captured. But the to answer your question, the big hot thing that everybody in academia is nervous about, or excited about, or both, is this introduction of large language models. And on one hand, I think there's a fear that if you haven't used ChatGPT or its ilk or Gemini, it's powerful because you can put in a prompt like write me a two-page essay about Thoreau, and it will write you a decent essay, freshman high school level essay about Thoreau, and that's great. For a lot of people, that's really scary because now how am I going to evaluate your work? How am I going to know, if I ask you to write that essay, how do I know it's your work and not ChatGPT's work? Um, so there's a fear there of what do you do to evaluate students? Is this going to upend learning? Um, Actually, yes, is my answer to that is going to upend learning. It's totally changing things, and that's good and bad. I think it's actually a good thing because, if we're really honest with ourselves, that two-page essay about Thoreau was maybe not the most innovative and exciting assignment. And I'm inventing that as a little bit of a straw man.
Mhm.
But if I look back at my old assignments that I used to give, I was pretty, there was times when I just did the same thing again because I was busy and I maybe didn't put as much thought into, am I really challenging the students and am I really, assessing their learning in a good way? I just kind of went with the same thing I'd always been doing. And now a lot of people are being forced into the position of rethinking that and rethinking what education looks like. And so the exciting part there for me is that I think we get to fix a bunch of things that we maybe knew were broken all along and we didn't quite get around to fixing. In particular, I think a big one that we've known for a long time is that students learn better when they learn actively, right? When I just tell them to do something, they're listening and they get about 10% of it, right? And if they're hands-on, they learn much more. And if you embed the learning in what we call the process rather than the product, that is, rather than me asking them for a two-page Thoreau essay and just telling them to go home and do it on their own, which we've known for a long time didn't work that well.
Mhm.
If instead we say, all right, well, I know you can use AI tools to generate text, but you still need to generate the correct thing. You need to ask the right questions. Right now, we're changing what's happening in the classroom, and we can talk about process. Like, how do you create a good essay in the first place? What does a topic sentence look like? Or if it's a coding thing, how do you create a spec for a program? How do you understand your user's needs? How do you really articulate what problem is being solved? And then you can go let your tool help you. That's a very different way of learning than, me up on the stage blathering for a while, and then I ask you to go home and repeat back to me what I said. I think that's making a lot of professors and teachers really uncomfortable because it's a real shift in the way we learn, and it's not obvious how to implement all this stuff yet, right? There's real challenges to changing all your pedagogy around. But for me, it's again, it's here to stay, right?
Mhm.
we're not getting rid of it. So, and students are going to be using it. And so we need to kind of lean into that. But we need to use it as a way to expose the really interesting learning, the really interesting thinking, which is not rote repetition, and it's not repeating the answers out of the back of the book. It's understanding what are important questions to ask and understanding, and even deeper than there, what's driving those questions? What are these fundamental problems that are making this happen? And an LLM can't solve those for you. That's where you need conversation with experts. That's where you need teachers and reflection and personal growth and those things. And then the LLM just becomes a vehicle, just as a typewriter would be or a calculator was. We had these conversations about those back in the day as well.
So are we prepared for that world? I mean, you're talking about a massive transformation, right? I mean, higher education, especially.
Yeah,
I mean, those are old institutions that have been one of the oldest institutions out there and very siloed and move very slow. So how do you see this world? I mean, in
that
detail.
is a great question. And there's where I get nervous because, as you said, higher ed moves slowly by design, right? It's like governments and churches and banks. They're institutions that are designed to withstand change and move slowly. And the tech industry is moving so fast. I sometimes try to remind people, our current seniors were freshmen in college when ChatGPT first launched, right? So that's a short window, right? So universities think on this multi-year cycle, and in that multi-year cycle, all this massive change has happened. Um, so I get a little nervous on both ends there, right? One is I do feel like maybe it would be nice to have something other than just short-term profit and capitalism driving what's happening in the industry. And on the other hand, we need something to kind of goose along some of those institutions like universities that are already facing a lot of other crises, right? Universities are already struggling with things like enrollment declines and budget cuts and things like that. And then here comes AI on top of that. And I worry a little bit that we could find ourselves in sort of that poly crisis where there's so much overload happening at the university level that we're not able to adapt effectively because we just can't marshal ourselves and we can't muster things enough to go in the right direction. So I would love to see maybe, just to summarize, a little push from the university side to move faster and innovate more, and then maybe just a little nudge on the brakes from the industry side that we don't have to go at light speed on all this stuff. Maybe having a little bit further out vision for where we want to get to beyond quarterly profits would be a good thing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So, as you are somebody who leadership in higher education already rely on for guidance, because again, you have the beautiful background of having a lot of computer science background and expertise in classes, but also has the societal aspect and journalism, all these things that make you that individual. So what would you recommend them to do? Because again, if I'm sitting in one of those meetings, they have a big deck. I mean, you mentioned,
Yeah,
demographic cliff, no funding, and all these priorities, and all these big vendors knocking in their door. Oh, you can use this AI to cut costs. You can put agents for enrollment. I mean, all of these things. How do they go about discerning what is noise and what is enduring change that they should be engaging in?
that is a great question. Yeah, and so thinking about universities specifically, I think there's a couple of answers. One, as you said, there's a lot of vendors, and some of it's real and some of it's snake oil. Um, I think getting good advice is super important. And I say that because I was recently at a NSF workshop where a lot of faculty and academic leaders were talking about this, that every university is kind of struggling with these same problems of too much change going on too quickly. And a lot of the decision makers, they're not AI people, and that's okay, right? They have other expertise. Um, but they're maybe not seeking out domain expertise the way they should. Instead, they're listening to maybe a salesman with a really great pitch, or somebody who has a very sexy approach to it, and maybe forgetting to engage the domain experts who've been thinking about these problems since before 2002. So that would be one angle to it is, make sure you're getting good advice. But the more important one is know your mission really well. I think this is where institutions, universities in particular, get in trouble sometimes outside of AI is they kind of forget who they are and what their core meaning is. And they start chasing whatever the sexy thing of the moment is and invest a lot of money in maybe a new building for esports or and I don't mean to pick on esports, it's fine. But they some person tells them like this is the hot new thing. I read it in Chronicle Higher Edu last week. Everybody's doing this, and they get away from what they do well and try to chase this other thing that they maybe don't do so well. So I think in an environment where it's kind of a bearish market and times are tough, you got to really be careful. Like, what are we really good at, and what are we better at than our competitors? And let's really, and that's your mission usually. And then everything's got to come from there.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, let's talk about all these employers out there. So, we are preparing students
Yeah.
for a rapidly changing environment. Um, Employers' skill requirements are changing. So, not only for, as you mentioned, computer science or data science, but also for every
Everything.
single profession out there. So, in some of the things you and I have discussed in the past, I mean, this thing is for non-computer science. I mean, anybody could use this and
All right.
create all kind of things. So, how do we go about telling leadership and senior executive that this is, as you mentioned, this is real and things are changing? And how do you go about moving that institution while the requirements of the job market are still not
Yeah.
clear? And we hear students saying, oh, it's hard to get jobs these days because some of these
Yeah.
jobs are going to, used to go to our, students who just graduated, suddenly
Yeah.
now are going to AI. So how do they discern? How do they think about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I went to a workshop recently and there's a hiring manager from Google there. And she said, we expect that every employee at Google, not just software engineers, everybody will be using AI.
Mm.
But then it was interesting because you kind of press her on that and like, well, what do you mean by that? And it was a little murky still, and I think even all these companies that are doing the hiring don't quite know yet what they mean. They know that it's going to be really important and they know it's moving super fast and they know they got to get on board with it. But I don't think they have a long-term strategy yet. When I think about my industry, the software industry, there is this real fear right now that junior developers are not being hired because what they're finding with all these coding tools is that if you're already an experienced developer, you can be extremely productive with these coding tools. If you're a novice, actually not so much. You're not really much faster. But if you really know what you're doing, you can get a lot done. And so there's a real temptation then to say, okay, well, we don't need any junior programmers anymore. We'll just have some really experienced folks and we'll buy them all the pro version of Claude Code and great. Um, but then, the question that you and I are probably asking is, okay, well, what happens in 5 years then? Who are you training to be the next level of those people are going to take the senior developer jobs? And I don't know that industry's figured that piece out because I feel like they're in panic mode too. So given all that, then I think a lot about, I mentioned we're creating this new AI major. What should it teach? What
Mm.
what do you prepare your students with? And it's tricky because, as we said, we're on, this 4-year cycle. So we're launching a new AI major in the fall, and that means that the first students will graduate in 2031.
Mm.
Okay. That's a really
That's a
long
long time
time.
in AI timing, right?
A long time. So it can't be about tools. It can't be like, oh, we're going to teach you prompt engineering, or you're going to get super good at ChatGPT, because there's going to be some other thing, right? So it's got to be these higher level metacognitive skills. It's got to be how to learn, how to communicate, how to execute a plan, how to be strategic, how to, recognize where there are gaps in something, how to talk to customers. And, as more of these kind of low level things get automated, it's going to be that human stuff that is more gray area and is more subtle that's going to really stick out. And, I feel like I've heard that a lot from hiring managers too, that like they can automate away all the coding stuff. It's kind of the same conversation we had when outshoring happened 25 years ago,
Mm.
if you remember that.
Yeah.
In the software industry, anyway, the idea was like, okay, there's not going to be any jobs in the US anymore. They're all going to go abroad. And then what they found was actually, no, there's a lot of need for communication and coordination, management, budgeting, strategic direction. That stuff is really hard to distribute. It's really hard to replicate, and you can't just hand it off to somebody overnight. It takes experience and it takes knowledge of your organization. And so, um, as a USF person, then I'm biased because I thought, boy, that's Jesuit education in a nutshell right there. Is like creating people who are smart, well-rounded individuals who can learn from themselves. So that's kind of my long answer to your question. But I think that industry is still trying to figure this out as well. And so interesting times we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I do appreciate it. And that resonates with me as in my tenure as a faculty and program director at computer science, I mean, in data science and in healthcare. That's what some of our guest speakers would say.
Yeah,
It's like, I mean, you can do AI, you can do machine learning, all of that we know because you know that this is part of your education, but can
hmm,
you relate with the rest of the organization? Can you
exactly.
have those soft skills needed to talk to non-technical people to be able to, make sense of the data as opposed to just looking at data and say, oh, I'm going to use this formula. So, I mean, that's right there. So let me just ask you a tricky question, which the industry is
Yeah,
struggling, is how do you define AI literacy these days for non-technical people? So now you're
yeah,
talking about there's going to be 4 years, and of course you're focused on the technology side, but this is something that everybody needs to have, right? And how do you go
great
about it?
question. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I feel like it lives kind of on a spectrum. Um, and actually maybe a spectrum is not even, maybe it's like a two-dimensional table. And so on one end of that spectrum, is sort of the columns, I guess, would be your skill set or your profession or the domain area. And then the rows might be, literacy, fluency, and mastery, with the idea being that you're going to get progressively better at these things. And depending on who you are, where you land on those rows will be a little different, right? So software engineers need to understand code generation and implementing AI algorithms and things like that, right? Somebody in the healthcare space might still be using AI tools and need to be AI literate at things like, understanding what a hallucination is or, understanding how to prompt appropriately. And then like all the way over at the left is what I would call living with AI, right? That is every human being is going to be existing in society with these programs. And so that means they need to understand things like hidden bias. That is, why is it that a model might be biased in the same way that humans are biased? What is misinformation and disinformation? How can they detect AI generated content, right? How does AI influence society and those sorts of deeper questions where like my mom might be interacting with AI in a particular way that's going to be around social media or something like that. A student who is using AI to write or to plan, the literacy is going to be a little bit more practical there, I think, and a little bit more focused on tool use. But again, it's not so much like where's ChatGPT, what's their URL, but more, what does a large language model do and not do? Like, how is it not a search engine, for example, I think is a really important thing for people to understand. It's not going and retrieving known information that a human wrote. Instead, it's probabilistically generating text based on some background. And so like understanding that distinction, I think is really important. So again, I think there's sort of a spectrum. And then I think within each of those areas, again, some people just need to be literate about things like disinformation. Folks in our law school probably need deeper expertise on things like that because they need to understand, not only what is disinformation, but what are the legal ramifications. So I think it's pretty broad and it's actually kind of hard, I think, to nail down like just one set of skills that everybody should have.
Excellent, thank you. And I know this is a tricky question, and we're all
It is.
debating. I mean, how do we do we define that? So what do you think is the heaviest lift in this? I mean, talking
Oof,
about um, it's a lot of moving pieces. I
there
mean,
is.
I
There's a
remember
lot
talking
of
to
moving pieces.
faculty who say, "I'm glad I'm at the end of my my tenure and I'm out of here." It's like so many changes on,
Yeah.
on
You know,
pedagogy, on the way we grade, on, what goes and how do we interact, and what's allowed, what's not. So, what do you think is it change management? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
funding
change
is
management's
important,
huge,
but
right? Universities, as you said, slow moving. Faculty, we get set in our ways. We don't really like new stuff very much usually, and we're all busy and we don't, one more thing, what? So effective change management is huge. Universities, in my opinion, are often not real great at change management.
mm,
I think we try to do it on the cheap a lot of times rather than, training people to do it properly. Um, there's this more subtle change management that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm curious if this resonates with you. And that's in getting our students to understand why they're going to school in the first place. So,
mm,
so here's what I mean by that. So high school and K-12 is all set up around external rewards, right? There's sort of a game that you play with school,
mm,
right? And the game is to get good grades. And you get good grades by getting points and by doing the things that the teacher told you to do and, turning this in on time and following the instructions on the rubric and so on. And if you do that, you get a good grade in the class. If you get a good grade in the class, you get a good grade on all your grades and then blah, 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 right? And so it's sort of, some students are really good at playing that game and some are not. And then they get to college and they want to play the same game. They want to play the game of get good grades as opposed to the game of learn things,
mm.
right? Because, and they don't know that nobody, students watching this, here's the secret. Nobody cares what your GPA is once you get out in the real world.
Yeah.
Nobody. They will never ask you. Nobody cares whether you got a B on that test. They care a lot about what you are able to do, right? And so I see a lot of students that they want to cheat on an assignment. They want to use ChatGPT to plagiarize because they're playing the high school game. They're playing the game of get a good grade, right? Oh my God, if I don't get a good grade, I can't go to med school or whatever. If they could just switch their frame and say, you know what, I'm playing the game of learning. I'm playing the game of self-improvement. There's no point in cheating then. Like all you're doing is hurting yourself. And I say that explicitly to students when they come in. I'm like, you guys are paying a lot of money to be here. The point of being here is so that you're prepared for your job. I don't care whether you get an A or an F, really. I get paid the same either way. But your job is going to definitely care. You should really care. So to me, that's like a whole big piece of this is like this cultural shift around getting students excited about education for intrinsic reasons, not extrinsic reasons. And I think universities can think a little harder about how to do that too, and maybe take down some of the things we've put in place to encourage students to think about everything in terms of points and grades.
That's a great point. So let's go deeper. I mean, and you and I are biased because we do believe in higher education. We
Yeah,
just pursue and we, lifelong learner. We keep learning more and loving this. So, higher education is under fire with what's the value proposition? I mean, just to
yeah,
put it in business terms,
yeah,
especially now, as you mentioned, you have a phone now that has, the entire, knowledge of humanity and more too, now as we build synthetic agents and what have you. So, how do we tell these students, how do we convey that message that you are, we're privileged to be going through higher education, that it is important and that the game, as you mentioned, has changed. There is a value, but the value is depend on you kind of understanding and defining what the value is versus, getting the best grade is like, how do I transform myself? And I know it seems to be the theme now
yeah,
to become a better human being, to better programmer or lawyer or whatever I decided that I want to go. So how do you go about changing that mindset on students and parents too, and all these communities that support these students?
yeah. Oh, it's a great question, and it's hard because then you have voices out in industry saying, "Oh, college is a waste of time," right? You can learn everything you want from YouTube now, or from ChatGPT, and um, in some sense, that's correct, right? I mean, if I just need to learn how to code in Python, I can probably pick that up from videos and stuff. Um, some people can, at least. Some people are didactic learners and self-directed. Other people, need to have a structured environment to learn in.
Mm.
And so that's one answer is, not everybody is a self-taught learner and not everybody can thrive in that space. But I also think, just to kind of beat this dead horse for a little bit, it's important to remind people that college and education, getting a job is super important, right? Education is expensive. We all need to work, but it's other things on top of that too, right? And this is maybe what separates college from a vocational school. And nothing against vocational schools, they're amazing. And if you're focused on just get those skills to go and get a job right away, vocational school is the cheapest and fastest way to do it. If you're focused on having this experience that will shape you as a person, and there's other ways to get that experience too, right? You could join the military, you could be in the Peace Corps, you could play a sport. There's a lot of things that will help you form as a human being. But college is definitely one that provides you with a lot of opportunities to have experiences that you wouldn't have in your life otherwise, that all allegedly, should complement that learning. And so, just to blow USF's horn for a second, I feel like this is something that we do well, is we take the co-curricular piece, the formation piece, and we connect it with the academic piece so that what you're learning makes you a better human. And making you a better human makes you a better learner at the same time. And it's not to say we're the only place that has that thing figured out, but I think colleges provide a really nice environment for people to go through that period of growth in their lives. It's partly academic learning and partly emotional growth and partly personal growth, and because it's all the whole person, right? It's all one.
Mhm. And this is something that resonates with me. Some of the conversations that we had with faculty in the past is like, think about this as a gym, right? You pay a membership. Just
Yeah,
because you pay a membership, that doesn't mean that, you already gotta get the benefit from it.
right?
You gotta put the work. So I guess
Gotta lift the weights.
that message resonates. You gotta do your work. I mean, you have this, environment that is, highly curated, mission aligned, mission driven, but you gotta do your work and you gotta know the values and what you wanna get out of it. And I think
Yeah,
that's critical, right?
yeah. But it's a hard conversation for parents too. 'Cause I understand they're saying, "Wow, we're going to spend $100,000 plus on our kids' education. We want them to have a job when they get out. We got to pay for this somehow." Like that's a real pressure. I get that. And at the same time, you want them to also want their child to flourish and grow and um, it's just a tricky puzzle. There's no easy
Yeah,
answer.
I do recall parents saying, okay, what is the return on investment on this,
Yeah,
100K or what have you that I'm gonna
yeah.
pay now? So how do they go about and how do we go about, defining value and what's real, what's durable, as opposed to something that
Yeah.
3 years from now is not gonna be worth it?
Great question. And I think that's where AI is really making people very nervous. Take my field, software engineering. For the longest time, that was considered the field that you should go into if you wanted to make a nice middle class income. You wanted six figures, graduating from college, great. And now that's kind of gone away, and everybody's panicking a little bit. What do we do next? What's the new hot thing? Um, and I think I keep coming back to that. What I always tell students is that if you chase money, you're going to get in trouble. You might work, it might not, but if you chase your passion and you get good at things, it will work out, right? If you're really good at something, you will eventually find somebody who will pay you to do that. And because if you're really good at it, you're going to do it all the time and you're going to let people know what you're doing and opportunities will present themselves. So just like be yourself, right? What's that line? Like be yourself, everybody else is already taken. I think and that's kind of what college really should be, I think, is helping students figure out who they want to be and giving them a little bit of space to figure that out. And again, I sometimes get pushback from parents when I say that to them, and they say, "That's great. let me show you the tuition bill. We need, I need a little bit more certainty and a little bit more of a guarantee. And the bad news is maybe that guarantee doesn't exist anymore. Maybe instead of having a guarantee at the end of it that your student will have a great job, you have a guarantee that your student has the skill set and the sort of wherewithal to be able to make their own way, even as the world changes really quickly.
Excellent. That's well put. So how do we go about, I mean, AI is, there's all this hype, especially for those of us who are lucky enough to live here in Silicon
Yeah,
Valley. So how do you discern between hype, again, think about these parents or think about leadership between
yeah.
what's real and again, going back to how do we discern this is not a tool, to your point, to chase only growth. Growth is
Hmm.
good, or money, as you define, is good, but then it gotta be grounded on, equity, gotta be grounded on, governance, gotta
Yeah.
be grounded, something that we can manage as human, as opposed to this thing that we all fear that this can become. So how do you
Yeah.
recommend, or
That's a
what's your thoughts?
great question. Yeah, and a few thoughts. I think, thinking specifically about governance, like as you're bringing AI into your institution, um, there's always this tension that everybody wants to go really fast and try the new thing, but maybe you're not anticipating all the unintended consequences. And so I think at an institutional level, being thoughtful about why you're adopting something. What's the problem that we want to solve? And if we can't see a clear need for it, then maybe we pump the brakes a little bit and slow down. I think that's super important. Again, it kind of comes back to mission and, not just, hey, we heard about this sexy thing or this hype that everybody else is using, but like, is this really going to help us? Um, I think, again, getting good advice is really important. Maybe even explicitly seeking out advice that's the opposite of what you're hearing from all the
Mm.
people in the room. And, boy, is that a problem in San Francisco that we're
Yeah,
in this echo chamber, right? And it's either I love AI or I hate AI. And there's no other opinions. But there are other opinions out there. And so if I'm a decision maker or a leader, I think I really want to look for those opinions and get my beliefs challenged. And yeah, I really want to think hard about the mission. And then, the last thing I'll slip in is because so much of this stuff is being driven by industry, it's really easy, to get sucked into lock-in or adopting a particular framework or particular tool, and then you're trapped, right? They go out of business or they aren't supporting your needs anymore. It becomes really hard to change. And so, as an advocate of open software and open standards, I would say make sure that you're thinking about the future and about how you can pivot if in a year or two you find that you're not where you want to be. You made the wrong decision or your partner went out of business or whatever it might be, so that you're not stuck with a bunch of technical debt that you've got to undo.
excellent. Thank you. So let's go deeper because this thing, there's a lot of value on that. So this is a jagged technology. It doesn't fit everything on any application. So let's focus for a second on leadership and also let's talk about faculty because students
Yeah.
are ahead, right? So, which areas would you tell leadership in higher ed? Look, just pick two use cases, three use cases that are mission aligned, keeping human in the loop, honoring society,
Hmm.
keeping us. What would you tell? And again, I want to stay away from, specific vendors, but applications. What do you think would
Yeah.
help this if I'm
Yeah.
a faculty, I mean, sorry, if I'm a leader in one of these, what should I be thinking, not to
Hmm.
get too, you know, caught up on with hype?
Sure. No, I think that's a great question. And I think you got to look at the different facets of your organization. So thinking about universities, a great place where a lot of them are already using AI pretty heavily is in the recruiting space, right? So trying to better identify students, better reach students, reading apps more quickly. We get tens of thousands of applications every year, and we're only going to admit, what, 800 students or something like that. So and we've got three people doing that job. So that's a place where you can identify right away that there's going to be some wins. Um, I think there's some internal places in the university. I'll bring some because I was just on a call the other day where somebody was talking about. I know you said not to mention apps, but I'm going to mention the one I hate, which is Banner.
Mm.
Which, if you've never used Banner before, if you're not an academic, if you're an academic, you're already cringing. But Banner is sort of the CRM that we use for managing students and things like that internally. And it's sort of notoriously hard to work with and not very user friendly. Um, and so, what if you could put what we would call a model context protocol, an MCP, interface on top of that so that I could interface with Banner from a chatbot? And I could ask it questions like, hey, my advisee, Freddie here, says he's ready to graduate. Can you please check his requirements and make sure it's right? And faculty know that that's actually kind of an annoying process to do in Banner. It's a lot of clicking around, whatever. That's an example where like faculty will embrace that because you're making their lives easier.
Mm.
And so maybe what I'll say to kind of wrap both of those up is both of those examples, and I haven't even talked about teaching yet, right?
Mm.
That's in there as well. But both of those examples get at an AI principle that I think is super important that maybe our industry friends are kind of forgetting, which is human-centered AI. That is
Mm.
putting the human at the center of the design process. And that this is not about replacing people, or shouldn't be about replacing people. It should be about empowering people. And so, if I'm a recruiter, well, I need help reading those applications. It's not that I'm not going to be a recruiter anymore, so I need some assistance, right? If I'm a faculty member, I don't want to mess with Banner. I want to get my job done more quick, that part of my job more quickly done so I can focus on the important things. Right? If I'm a doctor, I want to spend my time in my meeting with my patient, talking to my patient, not taking notes or fighting with the medical record system, right? So I think that's the thing that I would really say to leaders everywhere is start with that mindset that you have great employees and you want to make your employees do their jobs better. So what are the things that are causing friction that are preventing them from being efficient? And use AI to solve those problems. Don't think of it as reducing headcount. Think of it as improving productivity.
That's great. So anything your team hates, just go after that because it's the easy
Yeah,
part, and
right?
change management is going to be easier there, and
Totally. Totally.
hopefully it's simple. How about on the teaching side? What would you tell some of these faculty who
Yeah.
are, critically engaging, but they're saying, maybe not, I'm not ready, I'm not a computer scientist or data
Yeah.
scientist or what have you. What would you tell them? Look, just take a look at this, where you can keep your, autonomy, you can keep your agency, you can keep doing what you love as opposed to just, being a babysitter of an AI
Yeah.
agent or what have you.
It's a great question. And so I think first off, we got to recognize that there's not a one size fits all solution.
Mhm.
Different classes, different subjects, different teachers are going to have different ways of coming at this, and that's fine. Like within computer science, I think we have one approach for novices and another for experts in terms of how much we want students engaging with these tools. And that's going to be the same for everybody. Um, so that's okay, right? You don't have to solve everything at once. Find the things, and also not everybody's going to change at the same speed, right? You're going to have your early adopters. You're going to have your people that maybe will come along if they see somebody else doing it. You're going to have your muddy middle, and there's going to be a couple of people who are never going to change. And
Mhm.
organizationally, that's just life, right? That's how it is. So what I would say to the folks who are on the right side of the curve, they're the early adopters and the next stage is find those places where you're already frustrated, right? The things you already want to fix. And so for institutions, then they got to create space for this to happen, right? So a hard thing in academia is that we never have time to really redesign our classes as much as we like. There's not as much training as we would like. It's never as thorough and so on. So institutions need to take this seriously if they want faculty to adopt, and they need to create the space and the resources to allow people to do that. But then again, what I would say to those faculty is, hey, just try one thing and find the thing that's most annoying to you in your class, the thing that you're is working the least well, and see if you can integrate it there. Just try it, right? And but use it as an experiment, right? Treat your class as and it's okay. This is actually maybe another really hard thing for faculty to get comfortable with, is we're all used to being the sage on the stage. And we have all the answers and everything is perfect.
Mhm.
And we got to get off of that. First off, that's not how life is. And, we're just going to be teaching Plato if that's what we do. We need to be the guide on the side. We need to be comfortable with ambiguity. We need to demonstrate to students what it looks like to learn, right? And to make mistakes and to try things, because then that's what they learn. And so some of it is just getting comfortable with maybe not always being exactly right in front of your students.
So,
Checking
but
your ego a little bit.
that has risk, right? I mean, I've
Yeah.
talked to some faculty, and the issue is, talk about key performance indicator. I mean,
Yep.
we are evaluated in every class. We get a survey, and if we try, let's see, to innovate in some areas with the AI, they're going to be penalized. So, how do we
Yeah.
accommodate for institutions that allow for that type of experimentation and the fact that they're not going to tell that poor faculty who innovated that oh, you fell here and
Yep.
we're going to penalize you with your promotion or what have you. So how do
Yeah.
you go
You're
about
exactly right.
navigating that?
Exactly right. I mean, it's all about incentive structures, right?
Mhm.
We talked about the game that students are playing, right? And that's based on their incentives. Good grades is their incentive to go into college. You're exactly right that especially if I'm a junior faculty or I'm an adjunct, I am very concerned about what my teaching evaluations look like, and I'm going to be very risk averse. And so I think if institutions want to encourage faculty to try new things, they got to figure out some new ways to incentivize them. And, there's simple things like maybe we agree that you can throw away a semester's worth of evals when you're being evaluated for promotion or something like that. Maybe we rethink how we do student evaluations in the first place. I mean, I sort of have a methodological problem with them because we pretend that student evaluations are about learning, right? I say to you, Freddie, did you learn all the stuff in my class? And I don't know if you know the answer to that question
Yeah.
because you haven't taken the final yet. And we know that they're strongly correlated with grades. And so, again, this might be a chance to kind of fix a broken system. But if we're not ready to completely tear things to the ground and start again, then I think it's building in some safety supports for faculty. Maybe you're paired with a senior faculty who can assist you on this, or there's a whole team of people working together to try things so that you've got some support and you feel like you're not out there just on an island by yourself. But yeah, incentives matter.
So on that note, if you were advising boards, what is it that they should be asked management every month? I mean, what are the areas you're talking about? Transformation, incentive
Yeah.
changes, faculty taking risks. We're talking about focusing on areas with a lot of friction that not to disintermediate. So what are these, once
Yeah.
a month questions that you recommend them to ask?
Yeah. Well, so if I was say on the board of trustees at USF and I was having a conversation with the president and the provost, I think my questions would be more strategic level. I would be wanting to know like what are you doing? What is your institution's strategic plan around AI, first off? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Right? That's like the time frame the board should be thinking about. I don't think they care about what Chris is teaching in his class so much or they probably shouldn't. I think they should be thinking about, where does the institution want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to have every student have an AI literacy? Do you want to have specific programs? And those are all, one thing I've learned from working with the Jesuits is to keep asking that why question. So why do I care? Well, I care because that makes us more competitive. Why do I care about that? Well, because that will help us with our revenue and our enrollment, which will help us survive as an institution. So I think, AI is super cool, but we're doing this because we want the institution to thrive. And so you go back to your key performance indicators about institutional health and institutional success, and then you tie these questions to that, right? If we're going to thrive, we've got to be good at AI. Okay, well, what does that mean? We've got to be able to educate every student. We've got to have programs that are distinctive. We've got to be competitive. We've got to be placing students in companies with AI jobs, et cetera. Whatever it is that your markers are more generally related to that, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the institution's survival. That's what the board cares about.
So I like that framework that you're saying is good for the institution, it's mission aligned, and it's also for survival. So it's not either or, it's yes, both. By doing the right
Both ends.
thing,
Yeah,
the institution is going to thrive, and students are going to thrive, and faculty and staff and leadership. That makes tons of
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
So and I know we'll just have a couple more minutes. Um, Technology, going back to, again, a lot of changes, policy changes, bubble, no bubble, all these things that nobody has the answer. And I keep hearing that, look, as you mentioned, the AI is going to stay here. And this is not about the company valuations and which one are going to be the one wiped out and which is going to become, the next Amazon or what have you. So how do you, I mean, what's your thought about it? I mean, how you tell leadership about, this is this thing that is going to stay and it's already impacting our lives. And yes, ethics is important and growth is important, but being able to govern those technologies is important. How would you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question or not, but I think back to past recent transformations that we've had. For example, this time right now reminds me a lot of the early 90s when the internet first became publicly available. And rapid growth, everything changed overnight, right? You and I think, are old enough to maybe remember 1993. Um, and a lot of stuff worked great and changed, and a lot of stuff, bad ideas, right? Things that happened and failed. Um, the irony, though, I'll just throw this as an aside. If you think back at the time, the one that everybody made fun of was pets.com, because who would possibly order pet food over the internet? That's not going to work. Now, of course, Chewy.com does exactly that. The lesson in there is that we just weren't ready for Pets.com. We didn't have the logistical infrastructure in place because Amazon didn't exist yet, and we didn't have next day delivery and just in time and all those things. Once all that supporting architecture was in place, ordering pet food on the internet makes perfect sense. Um, so I say that because I feel like the AI boom right now is in the same place. There's a lot of ideas. Some are good and some are terrible. A lot of them are not going to succeed because they just can't figure out how to make a profit yet. But they're going to establish the groundwork for things that will last 20 years. And mobile is the same way, right? Everybody had to make an app in 2010. And a lot of, well, you didn't need an app, but some of them we really did. And it's really created some transformational change. So that's why I think having that multi-year perspective on what it is you're trying to achieve is super important because you might say, oh my God, we've got to be using AI, blah, 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 but it's not ready yet. It's not where we want to be. Let's just sit this out for a year or two and see once it's ready to accomplish what we need to accomplish, then we're going to step in, right? And we're going to kind of let things shake themselves out a little bit. So for leaders of academic institutions, again, they're in a defensive posture right now. And so I think it's really, that's where the wisdom and the discernment is super important. It's like, is this a cool thing? Is this hype? Or is this really solving a problem that's critical to our mission and to our operations? And if so, let's go for it. If not, let's just recognize that this is all going to evolve. And while AI is here to stay, what AI looks like in 5 or 10 years is nothing like what it's going to look like right now.
Excellent. That's a amazing message to close this conversation. So, any final comments for our students? I mean, you told them just follow their passion and don't chase, the big
Yeah,
money. And so, any words of wisdom for them?
yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot about this, and so there's a dark side and a good side to all this, right? So I think a lot of people are scared of um, some of the negative changes that might be coming as a result of AI, and that's a real fear. And there's a quote that I read by a writer named Ted Chiang, who's a science fiction writer. He's excellent. He wrote the book that Arrival, the movie, is based on. And he said, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he said a lot of people's fears about AI or about technology in general are really fears about what capitalism will do with that technology to me or to you. And that's understandable because they're often intermeshed together. And so I think that's true. And then when I pivot on that a little bit, I say, okay, well, but for students today, if you're 20, you and I, we're older, we're getting towards retirement age. For our students who are 20 and just starting out with all this, here's their chance to maybe untangle that a little bit and to think about, I like to get students thinking about what is the world you want to live in? right? And what we talk a lot about fear and a lot about concern and scared, and but one of the things that Francis calls us to do, Pope Francis, is to imagine a better future. And I think if you're a young person, just going through that exercise, like, what is the world I do want to live in? What would that look like? And how do I get there? And then pick that little piece of it that you're able to take on and try to do that, right? If you want, less sexism in the world, okay, how are you going to make that happen? If you want, a more sustainable future, what's that look like? Try to really explain it to people. Try to really imagine it, and then you'll go forward. But you got to do that dreaming piece first. If you're cynical and doomerist, then you're stuck. If you can't imagine it, you can't build it. So I think that's maybe what I would end with.
That's beautiful. And how about faculty, not to leave them
Same,
still?
same.
Same.
I mean, that faculty, boy, we live in the ivory tower. That's all we do all day is dream. And so but we're the most cynical people ever sometimes. So I think I would challenge my faculty friends to, peel off some of the scabs from all the times that things didn't work and take a step back to when we were younger and maybe a little more, I don't want to say naive, but a little more utopian thinking, and just try to inspire our students because they're the ones who are going to fix all this, right? We've left them with a bunch of problems, and we need to empower our students to fix it. And so we got to motivate them in order for that to happen.
Grace, thank you so much. All this wisdom. I mean, I feel
Pleasure.
accomplished because I got to share with our audience your wisdom. I mean, every time you and I talk in the past, it's like, oh my God, this is so much
Thank you for the
learning and
kind words.
wisdom and insight. So I'm glad we had the chance to share this, and I'm glad we'll be able to share this with the entire community. And again, thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your thoughts, and thank you so much for making the time to share with our audience.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you doing this, and please keep up the good work. That's well needed.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of AI Governance with Dr. Freddie Seba. For more insights, be sure to subscribe and share with a friend or colleague on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube Podcasts. To learn more, visit freddieseba.com. Until next time.